This took place about 10 years ago when I was a freshman in college. This is the first time I've ever recounted this story in full detail to anyone. I attended college in a rural mountain area in the Northeast. A small school tucked away in the rolling hills of the mountains. The type of place where the beauty and casual grace of nature is juxtaposed by the ugliness of humanity. The newspaper was ultra-conservative, and you couldn't go too deeply into the woods beyond a few trees without seeing some trace of meth activity. You know the type of place I mean. Anyway, one of my new friends from college discovered somehow an abandoned train trestle deep into the woods about 5 miles away from campus. A no man's land, basically. I don't remember exactly how we found this place because it was very much off the beaten path. The trestle crossed above a river which flowed about 40 feet below. It was actually quite beautiful, and we began going there maybe 3 times a week, just chilling on the trestle watching the water below and the sky above. Eventually, we began jumping off the trestle into the water below, then climbing back up. It was just a very college-y thing to do. Our chill spot, basically. So one day, just needing to get away from the dorms and away from it all, I decided to go by myself to the trestle for a swim. It was about 7 p.m, so I still had a good hour or so of dim sunlight, and I brought a flashlight for the way back. I made the trek through the pathways of the woods as I had done 100 times before. I left my towel and flashlight on the trestle and jumped into the water. The water was about 10 to 15 feet deep, I'd say. It flowed almost imperceptibly. You might as well be swimming in a stagnant pool. However, about maybe 50 yards away from the trestle, the river narrows and the current picks up significantly. Then, about 20 yards after that, there's a maybe 20-foot high waterfall that bubbles and splashes with extreme violence. We used to watch large objects go over and never come up again. So there I am, dimly bobbing my head in and out of the water, doing underwater flips, etc. I popped my head out of the water when I happened to glance over to the side of the river and see a man walking towards the water. The water is kind of blocking my view, so I don't see him fluidly walking towards the water. I more see him in different stages of being closer to the water, like flipping through a flip book. He's 15 feet away, 10 feet away, 5 feet away. I could barely give you a description. Maybe 6 foot tall, pale, skinny, black hair and a pulled back ponytail. What I do remember most about his appearance was the extremely empty look on his face and in his eyes, like he was doing something mundane. So I'm still in the water, not knowing what to think, and I see that he is no longer beside the river. He has dove in, and he's swimming pin straight directly at me fast. I try to swim the opposite way, but within a minute I feel him grab my ankle and tug. I try to scream, but water filled my mouth. While I'm under the water, he lets go and goes up for air, then grabs back on and pulls me again. It seems as if he has done this before, and I never once see him after he jumped into the water. He's gradually pulling on me to where the current picks up before the waterfall. I start to realize this, and I'm just flipping out, kicking, screaming, and cursing to no effect. Finally, I feel the current start to take me, and as I twist away toward the waterfall, I look back and see this guy just casually swimming back to where he jumped in the water, not even looking at me. This is by far the scariest moment of my life as I approach the waterfall. Long story short, I go over and I'm underwater for a long time, well over a minute. The water above unrelentingly pushes me under. The only reason I survived was because there was a large log that had gone over. I grabbed it and leveraged it against the bottom to push me away from the crushing water. I survive, obviously, but then I had to trek the miles back to my dorm in the dark without my flashlight. every step of the way, thinking he would come back to finish the job. The next year, a football player drowned going over that waterfall. The news said it was because there was an extreme current due to the recent rainfall, but I've always wondered about that. For a little backstory, I'm a personal trainer and I share a space in an office that also has a chiropractor. Usually they operate during the day, and I'll go in at around 7 to 8 p.m. at night to work out and do heavy lifting so their clients don't have to hear it. As a preface, every once in a while, the door will unlock and a cleaning person will come in. The door will chime and they will clean and leave. The family that cleans this building is Hispanic. Usually a taller man who is very nice will clean our office, and a woman who I assume is his wife will walk around with a trash bag and pick up the other buildings in the area. Tonight was the usual routine. Go to the office, drop off some paperwork, and squeeze in an evening workout. I'm putting away some stuff and printing out a few things, and I hear the door unlock. The door is older and it makes a very loud clink sound when the key turns. The door chimes and a man comes in, asking me in Spanish if he could come in. I don't speak Spanish and he repeats in English, "Can I come inside?" Of course, I think that it's one of the members of the family to come and clean, and I of course say yes. It isn't until 10 minutes later, after I go throw something away, I notice that the trash is still there and this man is still sitting by the front door. I didn't want to be rude, but I didn't understand why on a Sunday night at 8:30 p.m., a man who I'd never seen before is just sitting in the office alone with me. I text the chiropractor and tell her what's going on, to which she calls me immediately and says, "You need to leave. There's a button on the alarm to notify the police. Do you want me to come over?" I tell her yes, and I grab my stuff and approach the man. I tell him, "I'm leaving for the night and turning on the alarm, so you need to leave too." He looks at me and shakes his head and says no, very firmly. I freeze up, thankfully that I still have someone on the phone, and I say, "Why are you here?" He mumbles something along the lines of, "I'm on probation." I tell him that the office isn't for probation, and in my mind, I'm thinking, why would someone be reporting to an officer at 8:30 p.m. on a Sunday? He starts asking what the office really is, and I tell him it's for other specialties. I wonder if I made a mistake in telling him. He then pulls out his phone and begins to scroll through it. He says he doesn't know the address and maybe I could help him, suggesting I walk over to the pier at his phone. He scrolls for about 5 more minutes on his phone, and at this point, I'm hoping the chiro will get here soon. He holds his phone up at me and shows me a random list of 20 to 30 addresses. I tell him, "Maybe what you're looking for is across the street, but it's not here. You need to leave, sir." He seems hesitant to leave, but finally turns around and walks out slowly. As soon as he gets outside, I lock the door. I guess it didn't matter because this man somehow had a key and got in, but I locked the door as soon as I could. It was only then that I noticed there was a parked van in front of my car outside. This man gets in the passenger side, so he isn't alone. I decide to wait until the car leaves before I get in my own car. The van is huge with suicide doors on the back, and it then proceeds to wait for 15 minutes before slowly pulling out. It stops in front of the office, as if they were taking one last look at the building, and slowly pulls off. I wait and notice that they have only pulled up 50 feet just out of my sight. They are still there, and I could barely see the headlights. It's like they are waiting for something. Thankfully, the chiropractor pulled up in her car in time and the van was gone. The whole experience was unreal. I can't seem to wrap my head around it. The fact that this man came in with a key and acted like he was there for a probation doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense at all. The fact that he wanted to know what the office really was and he blocked the door is also bizarre. A few weeks ago, when I was moving equipment into the space, I felt like I was being watched. I thought that maybe I was just paranoid about being in a new space at night. But now I'm wondering if there was something I was picking up on and I did not know yet.
Wendell was a panhandler near my college. I always gave him my change when I had extra. Usually I kept a hard rule not to give money to individuals because I gave it to known local charities instead, where I could be sure the money is going to a specific cause. This one panhandler, though, he always sang opera music, quite beautifully, all things considered, even though it was clear he was begging for money due to poverty and homelessness, not busking for tips. I always thought it was admirable that he was trying to perform a service in exchange for the money, and I don't like carrying coins, so I gave what I could. It wasn't much, barely $1 each time. I would occasionally strike up conversations with Wendell, even if I didn't have any money for him. He liked to make students laugh with funny impressions or jokes. He was a bit older. I'm an undergrad, and he was probably in his 40s or 50s, so we'd mostly have quick chats about the news or the weather, or whatever. Nothing deep. Sometimes he'd randomly share something so intimate that I'd feel obliged to reciprocate with something at least superficial personal. Example, he'd blurt out that he almost went to college on a baseball scholarship, but drugs ruined everything. I'd be like, oh wow, sorry to hear that. I play volleyball. Not for scholarship, though. See you around, okay? Once Wendell called me over while I was walking with a professor / my advisor, and I didn't want to be rude, so I went over just to say a quick hello and introduce my advisor. When we walked away, my advisor was pretty clearly horrified and asked why Wendell knew me by name. I explained our little friendship. He said that the homeless in the city weren't like the homeless in the smaller towns back home. I figured he was being elitist, and I think he could tell that I hadn't taken him seriously, because after we dropped the subject, just before I left, he reiterated that I shouldn't forge friendships with the homeless population in the city, or even give them money because of the chronically homeless. The ones in the streets enough that you could get to know them tend to have criminal or addictive histories. I was surprised because my advisor is usually pretty progressive and passionate, so I appealed to him with, Wendell is a victim of a post-capitalist society, and all the other things I learned in his very own class. But he wasn't having any of it, basically saying however Wendell became chronically homeless. Now he was, and I should act accordingly. So my professor strongly implored me not to continue even talking to Wendell at all. I kind of shook my head thinking, okay, boomer. And if anything, felt fortified by the warning. Like it was a confirmation that I was a radical doing the right thing, leading a new path, breaking down barriers, bettering society. I got closer to Wendell and shared more of my life with him. But the very next time I had talked to Wendell, he was really irritable and distant. I wasn't sure why, until he said, so, your boyfriend, you two live together or what? I had no idea what he was talking about. I said, what boyfriend? And he said, the guy I met yesterday you were walking down the street with. And I laughed. I explained it wasn't my boyfriend. It was just my academic advisor. Then all of a sudden he wasn't irritable anymore. He was as chatty as he's ever been. I probably should have taken that as a red flag. But I didn't think about Wendell much at all then. I only saw him once or twice a week and only for a few minutes. It was around then that Wendell started bringing me gifts. I'd pass him and he'd have flowers for me, or a metal machine piece. I never refused because I figured it was a means of preserving his dignity when accepting money, like with his opera singing. One of my roommates did remark on the flowers once, and when I explained, she said it was weird. I thought she was also just being an elitist, and that I was enlightened, bridging the class divide, and superior to her neoliberal paranoia. I mean, come on, it was just a flower. My advisor clocked all this, so brought it up with me again a while later, saying he was worried I was being manipulated. I tried to tell him about Wendell's opera singing and impressions, and how he even almost went to college. But then I remembered the reason he lost his baseball scholarship, and I stopped short. Looking at it through that lens kind of made me reconsider the whole thing. I thought about what my professor had said. Sparing the details, we did talk for like half an hour, and I finally connected the dots that Wendell did have a history of drug use. And he did sometimes mention how a previous girlfriend, overreacting to something he had done, had derailed his life besides the drugs. So I decided maybe I should think about distancing myself a little. But very shortly after, the pandemic hit, and classes went virtual. So to save on rent, I went home to my parents' house. Still in the state, but not near campus at all. About 3 weeks into being home, I was watching a friend's Insta story when I had heard Wendell singing opera in the background, and I thought, I forgot all about him. Hope he's doing alright. And that was that. I kept watching different stories. Later that night, something about the story kind of stuck in my gut. It had popped in my mind a few times subconsciously, but I'd ignored it. But it kept coming back, so I decided to go and watch it again. That's when I realized my friend's video wasn't from our college town. It was from my much smaller hometown, which is nowhere near my college. That freaked me out a little, but I figured everyone moved around when the pandemic hit. My town isn't that small. It isn't that far from the college. It was probably a coincidence. I really wanted to mention it to my parents, but they had always warned me against talking to homeless people. Besides, like, can I buy you a meal? So, I felt too embarrassed to explain the situation to them, especially since it was probably a coincidence, and I would sound so conceited if I were like, he definitely followed me. Because, aren't I just so great that he's probably obsessed with me? We have a type 1 diabetic in the family, so we took quarantining very seriously. I figured I'll never see him anyways. I'm not going out anytime soon, it doesn't matter where he is. And nothing happened. Well, one thing. A girl from my high school who also ended up my college called me, and in summary said, "This is going to sound really weird, but I feel like I should say something. I was downtown and a beggar asked me about you, like specifically you. He knew you were on club volleyball. He knew your major. I didn't tell him anything, but I thought you should know." I was pretty alarmed at first because how would he know I know this girl? But once we talked, I learned that she had been wearing a sweatshirt from our college. So I thought about it and decided he probably saw that sweatshirt. Figured she might know me from college since we're both from this town, and was just trying to find out how I was doing. I thought it was sweet, also a little weird. But he was a little weird. That was part of his charm. I thanked her but told her not to worry about it. Besides, I wasn't in town much longer anyways. I had decided to go live back near campus. It was impossible to get my coursework done with my whole family around all day. So I went back to campus a while later. Didn't think about Wendell at all, until I saw him back on the same corner just a week after I returned to campus. Okay, even I knew at that time that something was wrong. I stopped giving him my money, stopped talking to him, but it was so humiliating by how low and mighty I might have been insisting that nothing was wrong, and everyone else was being paranoid and elitist, that I decided not to tell anyone what I had noticed. I was already barely leaving my apartment, never going on campus, and his usual spot was right by campus. I felt bad about potentially hurting his feelings, or reading too far into the situation, but I figured he'd get the message, and better safe than sorry. After finals, I decided to visit my brother in a different state. His roommates had moved home, leaving in an extra bed, so I drove up to his place to celebrate the end of the year and get away from it all. About the 9th day in, I was woken up way earlier than usual. When my brother isn't working in school, he sleeps until noon, to the sound of my brother talking at the door. I got up to see what was going on because we weren't seeing anyone. We stayed totally quarantined. His state was being hit pretty hard. My brother was talking nicely to someone outside through a crack in the door, and when he turned, he looked royally pissed at me. He turned back outside and said, "Hold on here." Closed the door despite the other guy protesting, but I couldn't hear what he said exactly. My brother immediately got in my face and, whisper yelling, said, "Mom and Dad are gonna kill you." I had no idea what he was talking about, but my first thought was the cops had come to arrest me for something. It was the only logical thing that I could generate first thing in the morning. The only thing I could imagine was being arrested for my fake ID, which I only ever used to get into concerts, and obviously none lately, so I was really shook. But my brother was still going, as best as I can remember because I was panicked at this point. He was saying, "And I'm gonna kill you. This is not cool. You didn't even ask." I wouldn't have said yes anyways. "But you didn't even think to ask?" I realized that you didn't align with being arrested, so finally I was like, What are you talking about?" And he said, "You're dating a 40-year-old guy? Older, 45 maybe? Of all the people out there, I mean, Jesus. Dad's gonna kill you, and then have a heart attack and die, which will kill Mom, and you invited him to my house while we're supposed to be socially distanced? You two can go get a hotel, because he isn't coming in here. I wasn't a dick to him, out of respect for you. But if he doesn't leave now, that's gonna change." So, I had no idea what he was talking about. None. I hadn't connected any of the pieces yet. Because you've got to remember, Wendell was such a small part of my life until this point. I almost never saw him or thought about him. My whole world had been turned upside down by a pandemic in the preceding few months. He was background noise, faint background noise, compared to all the other stuff that I had going on. So I just said the first thing that came to mind. "Dude, I don't know why you're getting so mad at me. I don't have a boyfriend. I don't know what you're talking about. Someone's got the wrong house." My brother looked like he was ready to rip my face off. He said, "We're adults. Come on. Don't freaking lie to me. I'm not Mom and Dad. We can't deal with this if you're going to lie to my face." And I said I wasn't lying. I think you could tell from my expression and tone that I genuinely was serious. So now he was as confused and irritated as I was. And he was like, he didn't just vaguely say he was here for his girlfriend. He used your name. He rattled off a ton of very exact info. I think he said, yeah. He said you guys had a fight, and he was here to work things out. Now, I've been looking for a boyfriend for a long time, so I was half thinking, maybe dreams do come true. Might as well see who it is. But I was also starting to feel a bit sick in the pit of my stomach, because it would be one thing if this happened on campus or back home. But I had changed states. My brother moved to the state for school, and I didn't know anyone here but him and his friends. So I finally did the obvious thing and looked through the peephole. I almost didn't recognize him at first because he had showered, shaved, and changed into clean clothes. For the first time since I'd known him. But sure as shit, it was Wendell standing on my brother's doorstep, hundreds of miles from his original corner. I was so scared I couldn't speak. My heart was pounding like I was slipping under deep water, with my legs tied. I just backed away from the door and sat down on the couch and tried to collect myself. My brother thought that this was my affirmation that there really was some secret older boyfriend who had just made himself known. So it took a minute for him to cut off his ranting and his dramatic, "what will grandma think?" stuff. Finally, he realized I was tearing up and he sat down, calmed down and apologized and said we'd figure it out. And I whispered, still out of breath, "No, you don't understand. He followed me here." My brother still didn't get it. "What? You don't want him to come here? What was your fight about?" he asked. Still thinking the guy was my boyfriend, I managed to repress my panic enough to explain the broad strokes to him. But I don't think he fully grasped how creepy it was in the moment, because he was like, "You're shitting me. That's hilarious. I'll take care of this." He went to the door and called from behind it. "Yo, just checked. She's not here. Must have packed out this morning. You should do the same. I'm taking the social distancing real serious," and winked at me. That's when, as my brother says when he tells his story, it got real. Wendell said, "You're lying. I heard her in there. Tell her I'm sorry. I don't know why she's avoiding me, but I got cleaned up for her, and I'll take her anywhere she wants to go. Tell her that, tell her. Don't lie. I'll know if you lie." That rubbed my brother the wrong way, and he said back, "Bro, you're not taking her anywhere. Now, get off my deck before we have a problem." And Wendell sounded like he was walking away, but instead, he was going over to the window. When I saw him staring, he looked different than I'd ever seen him. Even then, a few seconds earlier, when I glanced through the peephole, his clothes were clean, but they didn't fit or match. Eyes bugged out of his head. White stuff caked on the corners of his mouth I hadn't noticed at first. Shaking, just kind of disconnected from reality. He started banging on the window, shouting things like, "That's my girlfriend. You can't keep her in there. You little bitch ass. Let her out, you bitch ass. Let her out. Let her out. I'm coming, baby. I'm coming." I couldn't tell if it was meant as a threat or reassurance. I was so scared. I was too scared to run or even move. I think my brother was also as surprised by the sudden outburst. He was rolling up his sleeves like he was preparing to go out there, and I was trying to make my voice work to beg him not to. But I was so anxious, scared, and embarrassed, and sad that I'd missed all the signs leading up to this. All the opportunities prevented. That our friendship was never the wholesome thing I thought it was. Though, of course, that's something I had already began to grapple with before this day, and had so many thoughts swirling in my head, fear being chief among them. All I could do was scream. Not words, just and covered my ears to drown the whole situation out. Before my brother could charge out the door, he's an athletic guy, but I don't think he has ever actually been in a physical fight. Wendell punched through the window. Nothing actually happened when he punched, though, and there was an eerie moment of silence where nobody moved. I think even I stopped screaming, but when he pulled his hand back, all hell broke loose. A fair amount of blood started spurting out, and when he pulled his hand back through the glass, the things he was shouting started to make even less sense. Along the lines of, "Look what you did to me. This is a test. I told you I couldn't be stopped, bitch ass." And the look in his eyes got even more distant. I think the sight of the blood, which has always made my brother really squeamish, made him realize this was real. And he finally yelled, "Damn it, sis, call 911!" while he leaned against the door, which Wendell was now repeatedly running into, even though he was nowhere close to breaking it down. I don't remember making the call, but apparently I did, because within 10 minutes the police arrested Wendell without resistance. He kept trying to tell them his girlfriend was trapped in the house, and he'd come all this way to save her. My poor brother was even momentarily handcuffed, and had to explain he hadn't taken me hostage. Probably one of the most haunting memories of the whole event is, as they carted Wendell away for a rest, he started singing opera music. I've learned a lot of important common sense and life lessons from this saga, but most of all, Wendell, let's not meet. So this happened about 9 years ago, when I was a 17-year-old teenager. I was a wild girl and was often getting into trouble with my two friends, Amy and Jackie. This one particular night, I was dropping them off after staying out late, doing our usual shenanigans. It was about 3 a.m. and they lived less than a mile from my house, in a safe neighborhood. First, I dropped Jackie off, and next was Amy. They lived one street over from each other, and off of a normally busy 2-lane road, with a median separating the traffic. But this night, we were the only car on the road. That is, until I saw headlights coming straight for us. I originally thought it was coming from the opposite side of the traffic, but it wasn't. I started frantically honking my horn because they were picking up speed and getting closer. I got as far right as possible and put on the brakes, bracing myself for a possible collision. Once the car was directly to the left of us, they abrasively skidded to a halt. I could see the figure of an older man between the ages of 50 to 60, with gray hair and glasses. I thought maybe he was having a medical emergency. I rolled down my window and started yelling, "Sir, are you alright? Do you need medical attention?" And this guy was staring straight ahead with his hands on 10 and 2, not moving a muscle. So I repeated, "Sir, are you okay? Can you hear me? Do you need me to call 911? This dude ever so slowly turned his head to face us, and I repeated the question for a third time, feeling uneasy now but still concerned. He still hasn't uttered a word when he slowly gets out of his car and just stands there in the middle of the road, staring at Amy and I. Slowly, a smile starts blooming on his face. I realize it's time to get the frick out of there. I quickly put my car in gear, and when I do, this dude starts sprinting towards us. Now we're both screaming obscenities and what the fricks at each other. I look in my rear view mirror, and now this guy is standing in the middle of the road, motionless. I decide to loop around to see if he's still there, and because I still have to drop Amy off. We loop around to the same road in maybe 3 minutes, and he's nowhere to be found. Him and his car are gone, with the only proof of our encounter the skid marks he left behind. 9 years later, and I still have no idea what happened. Did he need medical attention? Probably not, because he stood up and chased us. Why didn't he speak? Why was he driving on the wrong side of the road? And why was he moving so slowly? So, creepy ass dude who didn't speak. Let's never meet again.